So I think we can get started here. So again, very excited to see so many of you here joining us. I'll introduce myself and then allow my colleagues from the journal to introduce themselves too. Before we kind of dive in and talk a little bit about how to publish with Panorama, what to expect, and offer an opportunity really to answer questions and have conversation with you all. So my name is Naomi Slipp. I'm one of a team of 4 executive editors here at the journal, along with our managing editor, Jessica, who is also joining us today. I'm a chief curator at the New Bedford Whaling Museum in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and I am finishing up a term as an editor with the journal. So I'll hand it off to Katie, who's below me, to introduce herself.
Thanks, Naomi. I'm Katie Jentleson. I'm the curator of folk and self-taught art at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta. And I'm the most recent addition to the executive editorial staff. So it's nice to be here, and I'm learning with all of you today. And I'll hand it off to Jackie.
Morning, everybody. My name is Jaqueline Francis. I'm an executive editor of Panorama. I'm talking to you from California College of the Arts here in Yelamu, also known as San Francisco, California, where I'm a professor and chair of the graduate program in visual and critical studies. And it's great to see so many folks on the call this morning. I'll say just in passing, on behalf of Kerry Watson, who is the other executive editor on our team, apologies, she's not able to join us because Kerry is an associate professor who teaches at the University of Central Florida, where many of you know are facing a very serious storm and its aftermath, so her power is out at present.
Do you want me to introduce myself to Naomi?
Please, yeah, I think that.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica, and I'm the managing editor for the journal, and I've been in that role at the journal for about 5 years. So I'm a very good person to come to with nuts and bolts questions, and I am the person who receives the journal panorama@gmail.com email that goes directly to me. So I love to answer questions about the journal. I love to help people figure out what they need to do to get their work in front of us. So please don't hesitate to be in touch with me. And I will pass things back over to Naomi to start the presentation proper.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica, Jackie, Katie. So I'm going to roll through the presentation, I think, this way, just so we can see where we're going and kind of keep an eye on time as well if we decide we want to jump ahead based on what questions people have. But we conceived of this session really as an opportunity to open up and kind of pull back the curtain and share what happens at the journal, who receives submissions when you choose to submit with us, what the process looks like, some sort of tips on our end of the things that we're looking for, what you might expect, to help you make sure that your manuscript is gonna find the kind of best possible reception. And then really, I think we're hoping to make this a somewhat short presentation where we're speaking at you, and then really open it up for people to ask questions and talk with us all as a group. So I'll just run through things really quickly. Here, a kind of top overview. Who are we at Panorama? We're the Journal of the Associations of Historians of American Art. We've been publishing since the fall of 2015, although we've been in existence for almost a decade at this point. We're about to publish our 16th issue, if I'm counting correctly, for the journal. We publish twice a year. We published an issue in mid-June and an issue in mid-November. And we have various different content areas that we publish within. So if you're thinking about submitting to publish with the journal, there are a lot of different places that can happen. We have top level content like our feature articles, which are the longest of the content pieces for publication, and which go through a double anonymous peer review process. We have our in the round and colloquium sections, which have different points of view. Jackie, Katie, do you each want to describe one of those? Jackie, do you want to talk about what in the round is, and maybe Katie, colloquium, just a little share?
Great. So as some of you who might have the journal's website up on your screens, and I'll just put in a link here in the chat, is the in the round section for our current issue, and also about the journal as well. Just going to drop that into the chat for you. Hold on. Whoops, I just sent it not to everyone. Just hang on here. So, you know, the in the round section is an opportunity for scholars to come together and talk about any issue that may have been explored in a previous context, perhaps a class, perhaps a conference, and sort of give an opportunity to expand upon it in the journal. It is something that you know, is guest edited, like quite a few of our features, such as colloquium, and it is an opportunity for scholars to present their research papers. Hang on one second. I'm just going to jump off for a second. Katie, can you jump in with colloquium? I'm having a sound problem behind me.
No problem. So as Jackie mentioned, with both in the round and colloquium, they're guest edited with frequency. Sometimes the executive editors are organizing, especially colloquium. But all to say that if you have been a part of a great panel, if you have chaired a great panel at a conference that you think you know, isn't getting developed into, for instance, like a collection of essays that you're publishing, that's a great in the round opportunity. And you could email our journal at Panorama, or sorry, got the email wrong, but email the website. It goes through Jessica and comes to us essentially with a proposal for a potential in the round. And those papers are typically longer. So they're definitely going to be, you know, between 10 and 15, or what's the best word count, Jessica, for an in the round, in your opinion, an in the round essay?
I think that because we've adjusted our guidelines for word counts, I think it's 5,000 words, including endnotes. So, so it's important to consider what you're doing for notes as well.
And then colloquium is a shorter form version. So in the round, essays are essentially shorter form than feature articles. And then colloquium is an even shorter form of writing that's supposed to be in response to a kind of some kind of polemical prompt, essentially. And those tend to be much shorter, at only like 500 to 1,000 words, including endnotes. And so an example of a colloquium, I'm co-organizing one right now with the executive editor who's not here, Carrie Watson, on people responding essentially to Dobbs v. Jackson and to the loss of reproductive rights that it has caused. So, so that's an example, is something that's very kind of topical, maybe happening in the world or in the field. If you wanted to guest edit something like that, you would draft a prompt and propose it to us, and then solicit the contributors to colloquium. And the same is true for in the round. As a guest editor, you're essentially responsible for proposing not only like a theme and a prompt, but who you might invite to contribute to these sections.
Yeah, and broadly speaking, I think perhaps Katie has said this, but I'll reemphasize it. You know, the in the round does sound is more like the conference paper that comes to print, and colloquium is more like the conversation that's informal among a group of invested parties.
And to me, I'll just say that I think these are some of the most exciting sections of Panorama, because they're sections that are really unique to Panorama and really can be, again, very much responsive to things that are happening in real time in the field. So that's just a kind of showing my love for what makes Panorama special, is our sections like these. And there are others as well we'll talk about in a moment.
Right. Yeah. So that's great summary, those, and a good transition to the other areas of the journal that you can also publish with us in. We do accept open submissions for the research notes section in the journal, which is an opportunity to share recent research discoveries, curatorial projects, new things that you're really excited about and you think people should be aware of. Those also tend to be somewhat shorter in form and are overseen by the editors of that section, which there are 3 of them. I see something pop up in the chat. I just want to make sure. Oh, Jackie's reminding you all, as you have questions, please drop them in the chat. We can pause, we can answer, we can stop. This is, really to be productive for all of you, hopefully. The other sections of the journal, our book review section and our exhibition review section, tend to not necessarily work from solicited material or reviews, although we're always open to hearing from people who think there's a book that needs to be reviewed or an exhibition that should be covered. The editors that handle those sections tend to work on the topics and find reviewers for those projects, but we're always glad to know of people with interest and topics they think that should be getting covered. So does that feel like a good, Jessica, Jackie, Katie, kind of a good place of sort of who we are, what our content areas are? So who are we in person? Well, we are a good size editorial staff. We also have a fantastic advisory board that supports our efforts. So we are the 4 executive editors currently serving that manage the editorial direction of the journal. And if you were to submit to publish in those areas in the round, colloquium, or feature articles, you'd be working with the team of executive editors, supported very ably and capably by Jessica, who manages everything behind the scenes and all of our communication and all of the production level details for the journal's actual issues. We do also have a digital art history section edited by Diana Greenwald and a digital dialogue section, which will be a new section forthcoming, edited by Tracy Stuber and Jennifer Way, and that will be focusing on topics around the digital resources, digital research, digital humanities at large. That will function much like the exhibition reviews and book reviews section, where primarily it will be content that will be solicited from editors direct to authors. Our research notes section is the other one where we accept rolling open submissions. That's handled by our 3 editors, Emily Burns, Kate Crawford, and Erin Powells. And we'll look at what the submission site looks like in a minute, but if you're submitting a research note for consideration through our online portal, you designate which section that piece is coming to, and you would identify research notes. But this is also a snapshot of our page. If you ever have a question for a section editor, if you are thinking about a topic for a research note, but you want to make sure it feels like a fit, you can always feel free to email the individual editors as well to check in and say, hey, I have this project, or I've just found this discovery. Do you think it's a good fit? Would you be interested? And that's always a good conversation to have early in the process. Okay. I'm going to pause for a minute, just see if my colleagues have anything to add. Oh, okay. So we've just kind of gone over this a little bit, but obviously what makes Panorama different, special? We are an open access online publication dedicated to American art and visual material culture, very broadly defined. We like to kind of stretch and query the boundaries of American art and American art history. The journal operates under a Creative Commons license, and this is a really important thing, I think, for our authors to understand and consider. I'm going to pause here and let Jessica just tell you what that means for you as an author and why it's kind of a special thing.
Yeah, well, I hope I get this exactly right, but what it means basically is that we are an open access journal, and so the what we publish is open for people to republish, to reuse without seeking specific permission from us. Now, that said, it is required that they acknowledge Panorama, that they acknowledge the author of the original piece, just as you normally would in the ethics of our field in terms of citing and using other people's scholarship. What that means for authors is that you are free to use the piece that you publish in Panorama however you like. You can republish it somewhere else. It is yours forever to do with what you want. Panorama does not protect it as our own property, and so you retain the copyright for it. This applies only to the text that we produce or that we publish on Panorama. There are, as you know, if you've ever gone through rights and reproductions, separate rules that govern the use and reuse of images. So that's an important distinction to make. The images on our site are separate from that Creative Commons agreement. They may in fact be licensed under Creative Commons on their own, but it's not under that umbrella agreement for the journal. Does that explain? Okay.
So one of the other things I think to to note about us is that we are free. We don't have a paywall. We don't charge authors anything. We don't charge readers anything. If you publish with us, your article, is fully accessible to anyone with access to the internet and some device to read it on. I think I think we have something in here about our readership a little bit later on, which will give you a sense of how many people might find and read an article if you publish with us. But that certainly, hopefully, those feel like some real positives for why to publish with Panorama. So I think we just went over this a little bit. I'm going to skip here ahead. So here are the details of the open submission options that we have. I mentioned feature articles at the beginning. Those tend to be 7,000 to 10,000 words in length, excluding captions and endnotes. We talked about research notes. Those are usually about 2,500 words long. And then proposals for in the round or colloquium. We also have an open submission option for letters to the editor, which can be published in a sort of floating talkback section in the top content of the journal, if the editors choose to do so. And there are parameters around that you can find on our submissions page, which looks like this. So I think one of the first things to think about when approaching publishing with Panorama is to review our submissions page and our guidelines. You can find that directly on our website. It's one of the top menu bars. And you can access information about the parameters of each of the sections. So like what that word count is for each section to make sure you're falling in there. But you can also download our style guide, which is a relatively comprehensive overview of how we expect submissions to be styled. Now that might sound a little intimidating. We don't open something up and say, oh my God, this isn't the right font, or it's not the right size, and just say no outright. We always work with contributors to make sure things adhere to the style guide. There's lots of revision and opportunity to make sure a submission does adhere to that style guide, but it's always good to make, I think, a valiant attempt with that first submission to be following that style guide. Any notes from colleagues there just about kind of the first step on thinking about that submission? We've got some kind of tips to walk through too, but
I'll just say that the style guide is also a submissions guideline document. So while it goes into, how you're supposed to format your figure callouts and stuff like that, it also gives just sort of general parameters for what the objectives of each section are and how you should tailor your submission depending upon what section you're submitting to. So it is a very useful document, and I was in the process of dropping the link in the chat when I popped in to answer that question. So I'll put that in there in just a sec.
Great. Thank you for that, Jessica. So then as you're working towards preparing your manuscript, there are certainly some things to keep in mind and some things that are kind of helpful to work toward as you're working on this process. So most of these points are really geared toward a feature article, if that's what you're thinking about, but they're probably good takeaways, I think, for most forms of academic writing that we would aim to publish with the journal. So I'll just walk through them slowly, and Katie, Jackie, Jessica, if you want to step in or clarify or elaborate, we can go from there. obviously these are not hard and fast rules. They're sort of generalized recommendations, things that we find are meant to be helpful. So generally speaking, we seek essays that rely on original archival research, that contribute something new to scholarship, that adopt a clearly framed methodology, and that make a pointed, substantive, and clear argument that has a so what framing, as in your reader should read the text and understand that big picture takeaway. We've talked about this a little bit. Every journal has submission guidelines and style guide, so try to follow them as best you can. But every journal is also going to help you achieve that if you struggle with that point. Style guides are big, and sometimes they can be very confusing. And so your editors are meant to be a reference point. The managing editor is meant to be a reference point to help understand or untangle things if they get confusing. Guiding your reader through an argument is another really important thing to keep in mind as you're framing and constructing that article. Ideally, introductions at the word count that we work with should be no more than 4 pages, unless you have a sort of creative intro or formal analysis that you start out with. You want to really clearly and repeatedly state that succinct thesis in the essay up front. Often people will also discuss some big picture theory or framing for the article, but you always want to provide a summary of that argument in a pointed way as early as possible to make sure that your reader is understanding where you're taking them. Think about using clear transitions. Whenever possible, summarize quotations rather than including large block quotes, and provide the takeaway for your reader from that quotation. And include a clear conclusion that revisits the major themes and that so what of the argument, that big point. Why should the reader care? What ultimately might they reflect on after reading? What should they be thinking about when they're done that article or essay? Aim for active sentence construction and a clear argument. We do encourage the use of I statements because those can be good ways to understand and capture that takeaway right away. Authors will often struggle with this. They back into arguments, they'll use passive construction, they might rely too heavily on quotations without explaining the import or the relevance to the argument. Some authors will avoid coming out and saying what they think about a thing, but you want to remember that this is your argument, your essay, that telling the reader what you think and why, ultimately, that's the important point, right? You're framing it for the reader. So it can be challenging to do it, but to take ownership of your argument and be clear about it there. This is another one to think about, and obviously it depends on sort of the focus of the essay and what you're working with or framing your argument around, but ideally your argument should flow from the objects of study that you're working with, using theory or other scholarship to elaborate on your own observations or argument, and to employ formal analysis. We are art historians, or we're trained around the study of visual and material culture. So describing the objects at length, spending time with them, using them as the evidence for your argument. Generally, we aim for about 1 figure per 500 words. So a 10,000 word feature essay should include somewhere around 20 images. And then another one that really is important for us, generally speaking, is to use section headers. And that's particularly because we're a digital journal. If someone's reading the essay, especially on a phone, the layout can become these big scrolling blocks of text. And so using section headers to structure the argument provides visual breaks, not just breaks in argument, that help people navigate that essay and make reading it a little bit easier. So I'm going to pause there because that's like a whole lot of stuff to digest, and just check on the chat, check on colleagues, Jackie, Katie, Jessica. If anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, we can take those too. But that's sort of one sort of big download.
We're side chatting about making this available because that's a lot of what's coming online right now, is people want to make sure that they have access to this presentation. And so we absolutely will figure out a way. It might be possible to, for instance, have it available on our submission page, or to circulate it to you all after the fact. But we hear you and we will work on it.
I think Jessica, well, maybe this is in the chat, but one thing is recording this to put it on YouTube, the YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's right. The meeting is being recorded and we do plan to post it on YouTube. That sometimes takes a minute because video processing is complicated, but within the week for sure it will be up on YouTube, and we will definitely publicize that. And we've already talked about putting a link to the video on our submission page and in the chat, we've been talking about maybe having a link just to a PDF version of this PowerPoint there as well, so that you don't have to watch the entire video and can just take in the information on your own speed. So we'll finesse that and be back in touch with all of you.
Great.
We just got a question about what is the best time to submit a manuscript. More seasoned editors, is there a particularly good time?
Well, we'll talk a little bit about kind of timeline and how long it will take from submission usually to publication on average. I would say if you're submitting anywhere in late April through early June, or late September through early November, those are like the 6 weeks when we're hard, getting ready for those publications to roll out, the mid-June publication, the mid-November publication. So communication with us can be slower during that period. But generally we try and at least be responsive. Jessica's always there confirming submission, and we are always reading things and conferring. I don't know. Jessica, Jackie, do you have ideas about, like, is there a sweet spot in the calendar to submit?
I mean, it's important to know that we publish twice a year, once in June and once in November, as Naomi just mentioned. So for feature articles, they can be in review and revision for a long time. I mean, that we've had some that are sort of baking for a couple of years before they get published. So the time of year that you submit a full-length feature article may be mostly irrelevant. But if you are, if you're thinking about submitting like a research note or something like that, which is one of the other areas of the journal in which we have open submissions, probably a good time to do that if you're interested in getting it published as soon as possible is, right after one of our issues is published. And then it's possible that if it moves through quickly, it might be ready by the next submission. That all depends on what the research notes editors already have in their pipeline, how much work it needs, how quickly they're able to get to it. But you could maybe strategize that a little bit in a way that you couldn't necessarily with feature articles.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking, exactly what Jessica said, because the truth of the matter is sometimes when things are happening, being submitted when we're in production, that's a particularly hectic time for all editors on hand, and things open up right after an issue comes out.
Right. So what does that look like then? So you've gone through, you've prepared your manuscript. What happens next? So we take our submissions through an online system. We do request required materials for submissions, although if something comes in missing an abstract or missing your figure captions, Jessica is usually great about catching that, and we'll follow up with someone to ask for missing materials. We do also have a submission preparation checklist that you get as you're submitting, and reminders about all the things that we ask for when you submit something to the journal. Again, these are just some kind of guidelines to think about. That online system is what you find if you go to our website and you go to Submit Now. Jessica, do you want to talk a little bit for people just about, like, they have to create a username, they should have their files ready to upload, of what that looks like?
Yeah, I think probably a lot of you have used systems like this before. It's really just a content management system. But apart from the benefits that it gives us in terms of just keeping things organized and centralizing all of the communications about submissions, one of the other things that our submission system does for us is that the author agreement is embedded within it. And that's an important step. And so by sort of combining the submission and the author agreement, we're able to do that kind of seamlessly, and it makes it especially important that things get submitted through the system. It can be a little quirky. And so sometimes people will email me directly and say, can't I just send this document directly to you? And sorry, but no, you can't, because it needs to go through the system in order to be combined with all the rest of our materials and to get that author agreement signed. But I am here to help you with OJS. I know all of its mysteries, and I do understand that it can be complicated. So you should never hesitate to be in touch with me again at that general Journal Panorama at Gmail address. I'm here for you. Before you do get to the point of going into the system and submitting your files, you will want to make sure that you have everything organized. If you're submitting a feature article, you're going to need an abstract as well as the text of your article. You are also going to need to have a list of your illustrations, and we do ask that you include, when available, a little thumbnail of each of the illustrations on that list. That just really helps executive editors and reviewers better understand the material that you're covering. And it's not great to be blindsided by the need for that when you go into the system. So always good to get your ducks in a row before that. Like a lot of other systems, it will ask you to sort of register and choose a username and a password. There's nothing too particularly complicated about that, but it is sometimes where the system can get a little quirky, and spam filters will sometimes keep the confirmation emails out. And just don't panic if that happens. Just shoot me an email and we'll figure it out. I can always go into the back end and just make things happen. So again, don't hesitate to do that.
One of the other real ways that working in the online system helps from the editorial side of things, and thus helps authors, I think, is that it streamlines all of the communication between the team of editors and the author and Jessica. So everyone remains on the same page about the status of your article, where it is in the process, and what things have happened to the article. So without the online system, if we were just emailing individually using personal accounts or drafts, we're going back and forth via email, you can lose things. And if you are working on a feature article with the journal for, say, 2 years, and a different editor joins the team, getting them up to speed on the project is much easier when it's all recorded in the online system. So that's another key kind of way in which it's really helpful to have things streamlined there. Anything else about the online system before we move to the next? Okay. So what happens next? You've submitted to the online system. You'll get an email confirmation about your submission. Executive editors will review your materials and confer internally on the next steps. That happens with all of the executive editors. So we gather, read what you've submitted, and confer on what our decision will be about the essay that you've submitted. This can take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks for all of us to read, for all of us to think about what you've submitted, and to talk about it and have some substantive discussion and consideration about the essay. You may get one of 3 decisions from the journal based on your submission. Your submission may be sent directly out to peer review. This would mean that the editors see promise in the topic and feel like the essay fits the journal and will present well initially to peer reviewers. Editors may request a round of revisions before it's sent to peer review, which would mean that the editors see promise in the topic and see that it fits the journal, but think that there are a few tweaks that could happen before it goes in front of peer reviewers who may have some criticisms that could be avoided with just a little bit of work first. At this stage, if it's in revisions before it's sent to peer review, your submission has not been accepted or declined, but it means we're working with you towards ideally acceptance and publication. Working with editors during this period, again, means that they see promise and want to strengthen the argument or framing ahead of that peer review process. The third one is, that your submission may be declined. And this can happen for a number of reasons. And I think it's really important, being declined, we've all had it happen. It feels personal. It can be really upsetting. You've worked really hard on something. It's something that you're passionate about. It's something that you've spent a lot of time on and energy on. And there are a lot of different reasons that something can be declined, including fit for the journal, topic. We may have published something close recently or have another piece in development that you're not aware of that feels similar or that touches on similar themes. It could be a question of methodology, or it might feel close to something else again, so a question of sort of originality. You can always ask for feedback from editors. We're always happy to provide that feedback, to give an opportunity for development of the essay. And you're free to resubmit after incorporating any feedback that you receive from the editors based on a decline. So I'm going to pause there because this is sort of an important point, I think, for understanding kind of the process of what happens, and see if there are questions or if colleagues have things to add.
Naomi, there was a question in the chat about the time frame for peer review.
Great. So I think, here we go. All right. So if your essay is sent out for peer review, what's next? Peer review usually takes between 8 to 12 weeks. I should have like 12 asterisks after that, because obviously peer review is a double anonymous process. It means that we have, as executive editors, determined or identified scholars that would be a good fit to respond to your essay. And that we've also communicated with them, gotten them to agree to peer review the essay, sent it to them, they've read it, they've then written a review report, and often life gets in the way, particularly in this really drawn out pandemic moment that we're in. Peer reviews can sometimes take a little bit longer, but ideally it's 8 to 12 weeks, and that's usually what we request when we ask a peer reviewer to review a manuscript for us. Editors will then share the 2 anonymous peer review reports with you as the author, and we'll also usually share general editorial comments or developmental edits that we're adding on to that peer review report. So anything else that we want to see in addition to what the peer reviewers are asking for or raising in their reports. You may go through 2 or 3 rounds of post-peer review revision before the essay is then either accepted for publication or sent back out for peer review. That depends on what the peer reviewers recommend on the essay. They can choose, I think it's 3 different decision points. Jessica, Jackie, Katie, it's to accept, it's to revise and resubmit, and it's to decline. Is that right?
Except with revisions.
Except with revisions. Thank you. So except with revisions is that middle ground. If both peer reviewers come back with a revise and resubmit, that means they expect to see it again. So it will go out for a second round of peer review before we accept it for publication. Once the editors feel the contribution is ready for publication, we will formally accept the manuscript in the system. And then you'll be notified of the issue in which it will appear and a timeline, sort of final steps to publication. So what you can expect reaching toward that final publication stage. During that interim period, you'll then collect your images and permissions and submit those to Jessica along with final caption documents. Once that's happened, your submission goes to copy editing. You'll receive queries and edits from our copy editor, and then your submission moves on to layout and proofreading, and you may receive some final queries or edits from the managing editor, Jessica, at that point, which is anything that may have been noticed from the entire team as the essay moves into the final proofreading phase pre-publication. So finally, your essay is published and available online. And that process, I would say, can take anywhere from 12 to 36 months. I was trying to kind of guess on average what we end up with, I think is probably about 18 months, because we do have some that spend a long time kind of gestating and some that people work very quickly on. So I'll pause there again and see if there are questions and comments from the team.
So we've been answering some questions about the journal's affiliation. Of course, our parent organization is on the masthead of the journal. We are the official journal of AHA, which is an affiliated society of the College Art Association. And I've dropped some links in the chat. I think there was a question just about promotion and tenure. Let me just scroll back up. How do promotion and tenure committees generally regard the status of the journal? Generally speaking, I guess that's following, again, CA guidelines in terms of expectations for tenure and promotion. There might be analytics that can be, what's the word I want, scraped about, the journal's readership, and in that way, its relevance to the field of art history, and specifically to the fields of American art history.
That's a great. I'll just add on to that. I skipped over this slide. Our annual reports are indexed and archived on our website, and they include links to the analytics that Jackie's noting, which frequently are the kinds of information that you want to incorporate into your tenure or promotion packets. And so they provide our general statistics as well as wider analytics about our readership, which would probably be useful for a review committee.
There was a question too about the stability of our site and the continued accessibility of what we publish. And while none of us know, what's going to happen with the internet in the next 100 years or anything like that, this is something that we have thought about very carefully. And it's part of the reason that, I think it was maybe 3 years into the life of the journal, we partnered up with the University of Minnesota Libraries, which has a very formal publishing platform, and they manage quite a few journals. They have the capacity to index our content in perpetuity, to archive our content in perpetuity. They have also helped us to be indexed on various different platforms, including the Directory of Open Access Journals, which has some pretty rigorous standards about not only the quality of what we publish, but also its stability, the stability of our platform. So we do feel pretty confident about that. But in addition to that, we are also careful to publish PDF versions of all of the articles, all of the content that we publish. And PDFs are an extremely stable format. So even if the world blows up, or not the world blows up, but even if disaster happens and our site goes down and that information as it appears on our online version is lost, those PDFs will still exist as stable standalone documents. And so we have that extra measure of assurance that our scholarship is not going anywhere. Because we are indexed through DOAJ and other places, there is a permanent record of what we have published. So that's something that you can be assured of, and that you can also communicate to promotion and tenure committees.
Also just going to pipe in and mention that we are launching a redesigned site with our next issue. So that's a kind of exciting, this isn't particularly germane to all the questions that you're asking about the longevity of the scholarship, but it is going to be a beautiful presentation of past issues, and all of the content will still be accessible through this new redesigned version of Panorama. So that's exciting.
Great. So it sounds like people are itching maybe to look at our readership statistics and understand the audience a little bit more, who will be reading your work if you publish with us. But I did just want to, well, let's look at that first, and then we can always come back to that slide if we want to, which is sort of bigger picture things to keep in mind. So who are our readers and what happens next? Well, we share the publication when it comes out, and we ask our authors to as well. We love it when authors can link to us on a faculty page, on syllabi, or through social media posts. And we do try and keep in touch with our authors for follow-ups, including occasional contributor surveys to kind of keep in touch and hear about how things are going. This is our readership statistics for 2021, which give you a sense of who's reading us and how many people are reading us. Jessica, do you want to just do like a quick kind of couple minute, here are the numbers and this is what it means?
Yeah, well, we have been experiencing really exponential growth in readership at Panorama. I think that is, indicative of us being a young journal and starting from zero and then just growing sort of massively. We probably can't expect such impressive bright green, increasing numbers every year for the rest of our history. But up to now, it has been very promising. Our readership does grow significantly every year. We do have anecdotal evidence that it's not just students and scholars of art history that are reading us. We have had contact from people who are really not in the field at all, having come across a journal article just by reading it and sending a compliment either to Panorama's editors or to the author that then comes back to us. So it's very much one of the benefits of being online and being open access. The little graph that you see here is not all of our readership numbers. Sorry, not the graph, but the table. It's not all of our readership metrics, but it's maybe 3 of the most important. So sessions are every time somebody visits the site, every time you click onto anything on our site on the internet, that's a session. Users are just that, the number of individual people who have done that. And then page views are how many different pages on the journal that person sees. So the page views number is always bigger than the session number because a lot of people will look at several different pages during any given session. And as you can see, all of those numbers grew between 2020 and 2021. We don't have our 2022 numbers in yet. The 2 graphs on the right side of the screen are just sort of a snapshot of demographics. This is information that's somewhat hard to capture because we use Google Analytics for all of our statistics, and Google doesn't know the gender or the age of everyone who's on Google. It knows that for about 1/3 of the users to our site. So what you're seeing here, which shows a steady trend toward younger and more female users on our website as the years increase, only represents about 1/3 of the readers for our site. So it's interesting information, but should be taken with a grain of salt for that reason. We do find it interesting because younger and female does seem to suggest that it's reaching a lot of art history students. That's not a scientific observation, but I think probably a safe one.
Thanks, Jessica. All right, so there was sort of some kind of good things to keep in mind. And these are more about kind of the process and sort of understanding what to expect in a more, I guess, philosophical way. So I think one of the big things to remember is that especially publishing feature articles is generally not transactional. It's generally not a submit and publish, but that it really is a process and it's a back and forth and it's meant to be a give and take. And that every one of those steps is a step that's taken toward trying to make what you've submitted stronger, and more rigorous. So the hope always between editor and author is that there is that open relationship with an author that's willing to respond to editorial criticism or feedback, willing to make revisions, and willing to kind of work through the process with the journal toward publication. I think this is number 3 is a really important one too, and especially for kind of junior scholars or people just emerging into the process, it can be kind of confusing, but authors at any stage can and should, I think, argue and advocate for their decisions, for framing, for phrasing. The process of publication should be collaborative and team driven, but if there are things that you feel are worth fighting for and you're getting pushback from an editor or a copy editor is asking you about something, it's an opportunity for dialogue, ideally. It's not someone saying these are blanket revisions and they must happen, right? And hopefully it's also something where you're feeling respected in your position as the author and the creator or generator of that scholarship. So I think, ideally it's a good experience and everyone is coming from a good place toward the table together to better what's being published in the end. This is another big one. We are a big team. The journal has a lot of moving parts. Most of us are volunteers, so this is kind of a service load. Your peer reviewers are usually volunteers. So if you have a question about timeline or about an edit or about the process on something and you haven't heard from us in a little while, please do reach out, check in, communicate. Sometimes there's a lot happening and it can be hard to make sure that everyone's feeling like there's a lot of that kind of back and forth or
I think it's almost over.
and then the last point here I'll just note is kind of collegiality. We really try and work with authors to make sure that it's a good experience. For some people, I think editing can be a really hard process, and we try and be respectful of that. We try and remember that throughout. But hopefully authors will also recognize and realize in that process that edits aren't coming from a place of malice, that, it isn't meant to be a bad experience. Hopefully it's meant to be a productive experience, and that, everyone really is trying to work hard from a place of genuine interest in your scholarship and making it the best that it can be. So I'll just pause there and see if colleagues have notes or if questions are coming in, and then we are right toward the end here. Okay. So just as a refresh, other opportunities to be involved, where to publish. We are always seeking material. We're also always seeking new colleagues to join the team. In fact, we just circulated our most recent call for editors that hopefully has hit your feeds and your inboxes. We are seeking a new executive editor to join the team, as well as an exhibitions reviews editor and a research notes editor. So you should be able to find those calls, and maybe Jessica can drop that in the chat too if it's got a monkey chimp survey, nope, MailChimp link. There we go. So we're always happy to hear from people that want to join the editorial team, who have interest around book reviews or exhibition reviews, who want to submit a manuscript, a research note, or a feature, who want to respond to a call for proposals for a colloquium or in the round, to write a letter to talk back, or if they're interested in serving on our advisory board, coming to the annual AHA board meeting, which is where we present our budgets and what's happening with the journal. That usually coincides with College Art Association meeting. Serve as a peer reviewer, submit a proposal to guest edit a section, or just join the conversation on our social media channels or through one of our partner groups, Digital Art History Society, Consortium of Online Journals, or through HNet or other listservs. So finally, we're always open to questions, to comments, to inquiries. So here's our contact info, and I will stop talking, hand it off if Jackie and Katie and Jessica want to round anything out, and then we'll take questions and more chat with people if there are some.
Thank you, Naomi, for leading us through the presentation, and thank you to everybody for coming. It looks like we do have some chats popping up. Could you clarify the process for the book exhibition reviews? Yeah, I don't want to say the wrong thing here, but my sense is that these are commissioned by the book and exhibition review editors. That's part of their purview, is to be thinking about the balance of the section and being aware of shows and books that are on view and being published. That said, I know that they also, get emails from people about wanting to review a certain show that's on view, for instance, and that's something that we invite, even though it's not through our kind of this more centralized channel of submission process that Naomi was outlining.
We do get queries from authors, of course, in terms of recent book publications, that, again, it is up to the reviewers to decide not only what the merits of the publication are in terms of its intervention in the field, but also what else is going on in terms of recent book publications. Especially with exhibition reviews, we try to do our best in terms of geographical breadth, not just doing shows in New York City, where of course there are a lot of major shows at the big institutions, but seeing exhibitions that are relevant elsewhere in the United States and in North America and sometimes abroad. But again, the book and exhibition reviews editors are a team working together to commission those kind of assessments of work, and are working independently of the exhibition, the executive editor team.
Yeah, I would just add that there's a reason that we have all of the editors' contact information up on the website. You are always free to approach editors and to say, I really feel like this exhibition should be covered. I would like to write it. I would like you to consider asking this other person to write it. The difference in submissions and why we say they're not open submissions for exhibition reviews and book reviews is because it's not the kind of scenario like with a feature article or a research note where you write it first and then submit it on the online system. That's not how it works for exhibition reviews. It starts with some contact with the exhibition or book reviews editors, whether they have reached out to you or whether you reach out to them. So that's really the fundamental difference.
I think just to reiterate, emails of interest, whether it's noting a book or exhibition that you think should be reviewed or whether it's volunteering to do that work, are welcome.
We have another question in the chat about whether there is a 2-year requirement between publishing articles and reviews, which I think means the frequency with which an author may appear in our virtual pages.
Many points is
which is something we've talked about before. I don't know if that's something you want to address, Naomi. I see you nodding.
Yeah. So there isn't a hard and fast rule, and I would say, different sections sort of have different kind of policies that they work with. We do track contributors to the journal to keep track of how many people are contributing and with what frequency, and we do try not to duplicate the same voices too much within the pages of the journal. There have been unusual instances, I would say, where someone appears in back-to-back issues, and oftentimes that's because maybe guest editors have commissioned something from a contributor who we're working with on something that is anonymized or otherwise not, the rest of the team isn't aware that something is sort of coming through the pipeline. And we do have to keep that sort of anonymity at a certain point, especially if we're working on feature articles with someone where they may go back out for anonymous peer review. So there are cases where sometimes things will come out in back-to-back issues. We definitely do maintain sort of a rule, although I hate to use the word rule because we try not to keep those, about publishing an article twice in the same, or an author twice in the same issue. That is something that we do avoid, and we have moved contributions to another issue to keep that from happening. And again, usually that was because we had something else happening that not everyone knew about, and something else got commissioned, and then we had to adjust. So generally speaking, there isn't a mandate. Certainly, if we have someone guest editing a section and they're talking about, maybe there are 5 slots for a section and they have a list of 8 people that they're interested in working with, and they might share those names, and we might say, well, we just published that one of those scholars, so maybe we could think about varying the voices, but that's not something that we mandate. Jackie, Katie, do you want to jump in on that or elaborate at all what I said?
I think you sort of covered the bases. I mean, again, the ambition is to invite as many voices to be part of the online publication as possible. If you have feedback for us on that, we're also interested in hearing more from you on that topic.
To that point, Naomi mentioned that we are introducing a new section, this digital dialogue section, that's really an analog to book reviews and exhibition reviews, but is going to be a place to showcase and think critically about digital resources. So, digital archives, digital, like what Naomi said before, digital humanities projects, all those sorts of things, and to acknowledge them and talk about them within the context of the journal. So that's a great new section. But as we, continue to evolve and be responsive to the field, there might be other evolutions of sections. Naomi mentioned we're kind of coming up on the 10-year anniversary, and I think the founders of Panorama envisioned it as a journal that was not only free and open access and breaking, all this new ground on that front, but also a journal that was really trying to carve out a space for scholarship that, didn't exist in other existing journals. And so I think we very much invite ideas and feedback as we continue to think about the journal's future for how the journal should continue to be responsive and innovative in how it's creating different kinds of platforms for content that is vital to this changing field. So just throwing that out there for all of your brains to think about on this Friday at 4:00. Okay, are we missing any questions? Did we miss any in the chat, or are there any additional final thoughts?
Taking a soft screen share if anyone wants to just unmute and ask something or share or.
Okay.
Well, this is so encouraging. We're so happy to see so many people. I think it was almost like 57, including us, who are on the editorial team at one point. So tell your friends and your colleagues, what a great time you had. And do come back at us with questions, comments for clarification, and certainly submissions. We're happy to hear from you. And we hope to put this up on our platform so that you can review some of the information that you heard here today.
Thank you all for joining us.